1914, the Australian Army formed a flying school based at Point Cook, near Melbourne. One of the first trainees, Lieutenant Richard Williams, was destined to become the first chief of the Royal Australian Air Force. It took 10 hours to learn flying in those days. The flimsy box kites were only permitted to fly when there was no wind, usually in the morning and at sunset. Later, in 1914, World War I was declared. For the first time, aeroplanes appeared in the sky as machines of war. They were used first for observation of enemy movement in the same way as airships, then armed with rifles, later machine guns. In 1916, No. 1 Squadron Australian Flying Corps was posted in the Middle East to aid the British Army's fight against the Turks. The Turks proved more powerful at first with the support of greatly superior German planes. In spite of that handicap, the Australian and the British flyers made daring bombing attacks behind the enemy lines. Three squadrons of Australian airmen joined the war in Europe in 1917. It was said at the time that the airman's life was one of comparative ease, interspersed with moments of intense fear. The German flyers had 2 years of combat flying behind them and provided the inexperienced Australians with some of those moments of intense fear. Altogether, 276 enemy aircraft were destroyed by the Australian flying squadrons in Europe for the loss of 78 men and 60 machines. The veterans of World War I brought aviation with them into civilian life. The England to Australia air race in 1919 created great excitement. Veterans, brothers Ross and Keith Smith, became popular heroes when they won the big event of the year. The decisive role of air power in the final stages of the war demonstrated the need for an independent air defence service. In 1921, the Royal Australian Air Force was established. Great Britain donated 128 aircraft to the new Air Force to replace those supplied by Australia for World War I. One of the RAAF's initial tasks was to survey the Australian coastline for defence from the air. Two airmen circled the Australian continent in 1924, looking for aerodrome sites and sea landing areas. Thousands turned out to welcome them back. A firm belief in a lasting peace made the government unwilling to spend money on defence in the early 30s, and the existing fleet of aircraft, including Wapitis, Moths and Bulldogs, was rapidly becoming obsolete. Training of staff continued under Air Commodore Williams.
Our continent is a vast and valuable one, and its defence calls for the highest efficiency in the small forces which we maintain. Let us show you how the Royal Australian Air Force sets about its part of the task.
Peace? For how long? As international tension grew, more funds were allocated to expand the R.A.A.F. and the young Australian aircraft manufacturing industry. The Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation was founded, and by 1939 delivered the first locally made Wirraways. The Wirraways and British-made Avro Anson bombers were the Air Force's most advanced aircraft in the late 1930s. When war was declared in 1939, Number 10 Squadron was in England to take delivery of Sunderland flying boats. Number 10 became the first Commonwealth Squadron to go into action with the R.A.A.F Coastal Command, patrolling the English Channel, hunting for submarines and keeping vigil over British shipping.
.388, landed at 1 o'clock.
Australia took part in the ambitious Empire Air Training Scheme to achieve, by cooperative effort, an air force of overwhelming strength, a force that would darken the skies over the enemy. Many Australians trained in Canada and Rhodesia. Although the Australians served under the British Operational Command, they received higher rates of pay and wore Australian uniforms. In the Battle of Britain, Australians flew Hurricanes and Spitfire fighters.
There's no problem out here.
Over Europe, thousands of Australians lost their lives during Bomber Command's night raids. At times, losses were so heavy that statistically, a man had no chance of survival.
At that height, 040 at 14.
While Australians flew in air operations over Europe, their thoughts were on the struggle in the Southwest Pacific, which threatened their homeland. In Africa and the Middle East, the Allies at first successfully countered the Italian invasion. But when the German army and the Luftwaffe came to the Italians' aid, the Allies suffered heavy losses. Several RAAF fighter and bomber squadrons equipped with American and British aircraft were assigned to the area. Many Australians also served nearby in Royal Air Force units. Finally spearheaded the attack to destroy the German and Italian armies in Africa. Australia itself came under a grave threat. At the end of 1941, Japan attacked the British Commonwealth and American forces in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Within weeks, Allied bases in Malaya, New Britain, Borneo, Sumatra, Java and Timor were overrun. Rangoon, the Burmese capital, was attacked by Japanese bombers. The R.A.A.F squadrons there were partly manned by Australians and New Zealanders, who inflicted heavy losses on the Japanese before retreating to India. Early in 1942, the Japanese bombed Darwin in the first of 64 air attacks. Broome and Wyndham in Western Australia also suffered from bombing raids. Instantly, the decision to manufacture aircraft in Australia was vindicated. Without locally built Beauforts and boomerangs, the RAAF would have been short of aircraft. The national emergency led to further rapid expansion of the RAAF. Thousands of young men volunteered for training, and the Air Force grew to 164,000 men. "18,000 women joined the Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force, established in 1941. They served in a wide variety of jobs and released men for other active duties. American forces defeated in the Philippines rallied in Australia under General MacArthur, the commander of all Allied combat forces in the Southwest Pacific area. Hard-pressed Britain released 1 R.A.A.F and 2 Australian squadrons of Spitfire fighters to assist in the defence of Australia. At last, the RAAF had aircraft that matched the Japanese Zeros in speed and manoeuvrability. The turning point of the war in the Pacific occurred in March 1943 with the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. American and Australian bombers and fighters destroyed a vital Japanese supply convoy. The Allies proceeded to push the enemy back. RAAF squadrons raided Japanese bases in New Guinea, New Britain, and adjoining islands. RAAF Catalina patrol searched out enemy supply ships. As the island-hopping Allies advanced in the Pacific, RAAF airfield construction teams built landing strips on island after island. The Japanese were not the only enemy. The jungle, torrential rain, humidity, and tropical diseases took their toll. There were times of sheer boredom, while presumably the war was going on somewhere else. Towards the end of the war, the RAAF was assigned to wiping out isolated enemy outposts. Perhaps not the most heroic of tasks, but a vital one. Some barely made it back. Others were lucky to come back without their machines, but more than 10,000 RAAF men lost their lives in World War II. Peace at last, and again there was peacetime work for the RAAF. The RAAF took part in artificial rain-making experiments. Air Force officers took part in expeditions to the Antarctic. The Air Force assisted the Army with flood relief and rescue work. But Cold War brought about new tensions, which culminated in the invasion of South Korea in June 1950. A squadron of RAAF Mustang fighters was assigned to the United Nations forces in South Korea. This squadron was later re-equipped with British-built Meteors, the RAAF's first jets in combat. The Korean conflict was a war neither won nor lost, except for the loss of lives on both sides, including 35 Australian airmen. In 1948, the communist insurgents in Malaya caused a state of emergency. A squadron of R.A.A.F. Lincoln bombers was sent to demoralize the terrorists and keep them constantly on the move. A threat similar to the Malayan emergency developed in Thailand in 1962. Under the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization Pact, a squadron of Australian Avon Sabre jets equipped with Sidewinder air-to-air missiles was ready for any large-scale attacks. When the South and North Vietnam conflict developed into a serious war in 1964, Australia sent a squadron of Caribou transport aircraft for general duties. A year later, this contribution was enlarged with a battalion of ground troops and a squadron of Iroquois helicopters. Medical evacuees were flown to Australia in Hercules transports. During repatriation, they were cared for by women of the R.A.A.F nursing service. To meet a further commitment, Australia assigned a squadron of Canberra bombers to the war in Vietnam.
A heavy wooded valley, and has been reported that there's heavy concentrations there and light ground fire.
At the Malaysian airbase at Butterworth are stationed 2 squadrons of R.A.A.F Mirage jet fighters as part of the British Commonwealth's contribution to political stability in the area. Point Cook, where the R.A.A.F was first established, is now the site of the R.A.A.F Academy, training officers to university level in many subjects. The yearly graduation ceremony is a regular function attended by the R.A.A.F Central Band. Lieutenant Richard Williams, now Air Marshal Sir Richard Williams, has seen the Air Force undergo some remarkable changes.
Experience warns me not to dare to forecast aviation development. I'm sure that it will surprise us. However, I would say this, that I know of no other country in the world as suitable as is Australia to make full use of aviation development, whether it be in peacetime development of the country or for defense.
To provide trained personnel for its servicing departments, the R.A.A.F conducts an apprentice training school at Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. At Edinburgh, South Australia, new recruits receive their basic training. A squadron of Orion reconnaissance aircraft equipped with anti-submarine detectors and weapons is also based at Edinburgh. The Orions fly regular patrols around the entire Australian coastline. RAAF base Pierce, Western Australia, is where pilots complete their advanced training on Italian-designed Macchi jet trainers built in Australia. The federal capital, the Air Board meets regularly, presided over by the Chief of Air Staff, Air Marshal Sir Colin Hanna. The Air Board is the decision-making body of the RAAF. The RAAF has expanded to become a frontline defence force for the whole continent. At Darwin in the Northern Territory, the RAAF frequently holds exercises. The Royal Air Force usually takes part and, in this instance, contributes 4 Vulcan bombers, Britain's frontline strike aircraft. Bombers become part of the mock enemy force based at Tyndall, 200 miles inland. The order to attack calls the squadrons off in minutes. At the Darwin base, the defending force stands by. At supersonic speeds, it's important to intercept the enemy as far away from the target as possible. The pilots wait in the cockpits of their barrages to take off seconds after the alarm is given. A Neptune takes off for maritime reconnaissance and surveillance.
Right, is also steady. Get back up the ski. Now. Ready, pop. Your pass is good now.
The RAAF Airfield Defence Guards are off to check a report that enemy ground troops are infiltrating the airfield perimeter. Radar installations detect enemy aircraft approaching. Somewhere in the distant sky, a sophisticated aerial battle is about to be fought. Though the victory is only photographic and electronic, it is waged with the seriousness of a real war.
Airway 61, scramble.
Whipcord 21, vector 170, Angels 36, channel 18, scramble.
Whipcord 21, QNH 1008, clear for takeoff, barrier up.
To keep pace with advancing technology, the Australian government ordered 24 American F-111 fighter bombers of advanced design for the RAAF. The aircraft are currently in the United States for testing and modifications if necessary. The RAAF is leasing 24 Phantom F-4Es, one of the most efficient strike aircraft ever built. Since the foundation 50 years ago in 1921, the RAAF has been in active service for 25 years, half of its life, and has gained most operational experience in other countries. With the latest aircraft and equipment available, the Royal Australian Air Force provides an efficient air defence force and acts as a stabilising power in Southeast Asia and the Pacific.